My stepfather introduced me to his best friend, and I never imagined he would come to my room every night. That night was supposed to be ordinary, just another evening in a house I was still learning to call home. But when my stepfather introduced me to his best friend, I felt a tension in the air I couldn't explain. He had a presence that lingered, a look that stayed longer than it should, and a silence that spoke more than words ever could. I never imagined how quickly that presence would slip into my life, or how those late-night visits would leave me torn between fear, fascination, and desire. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the twists and turns of stories that might just change the way you look at love, secrets, and forbidden emotions. It all started with a knock on my door late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep. I never thought a simple introduction could change the rhythm of my nights, but that's exactly what happened when my stepfather brought his best friend into our home. His name was Michael, and the first time I saw him, he was standing in the doorway with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was taller than my stepfather, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that carried streaks of gray at the temples. His presence filled the room effortlessly, as if he belonged there more than anyone else. "Son, this is Michael," my stepfather said, his hand resting casually on Michael's shoulder. "We've known each other since college. He's family." Family. That word echoed in my head, and yet, in that moment, Michael didn't feel like family. There was something in the way his eyes lingered on me, scanning me for just a second too long before he nodded in greeting. It wasn't inappropriate, at least not openly, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten with an unfamiliar unease. I shook his hand, the warmth of his grip lingering longer than it should have. "Nice to meet you," I said, though my voice caught slightly in my throat. Dinner that night was filled with stories of the past, my stepfather and Michael laughing about their college days, old adventures, and reckless choices. I sat there, listening, watching the way Michael's eyes would shift toward me from time to time, catching me off guard. He didn't say much about himself in the present. It was as if the man who sat across the table was built entirely of history and shadows. Later that evening, when everyone was preparing to sleep, Michael passed me in the hallway. He placed his hand briefly on my shoulder, leaning in as if to whisper something, though no words came. His breath brushed my ear, and then he simply walked on, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. I went to my room, trying to shake the feeling off. The house grew quiet. My stepfather's bedroom door shut, and I could hear the faint sound of the TV playing behind it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the dinner, the handshake, the touch on my shoulder. It felt like nothing and everything all at once. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it, the soft creak of floorboards outside my room. My pulse quickened. I told myself it could be anyone, maybe my stepfather getting water, but the steps were too slow, too deliberate. They stopped right at my door. The doorknob turned with agonizing slowness. I sat up, frozen, my breath caught in my chest. The door opened, and there he was, Michael, standing in the dim light of the hallway, his figure outlined by shadows. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, calm, almost soothing. I shook my head, unable to speak. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The room felt smaller instantly, the air heavier. He walked closer, pulling out the chair at my desk and sitting down as if he belonged there. "Your stepfather means a lot to me," he said after a pause. "But tonight I just couldn't stop thinking about you." His words stunned me. I searched for something to say, but my throat was dry, my voice gone. My body felt caught between fear and something else I couldn't yet name. "You don't have to say anything," he continued, leaning back in the chair. His eyes studied me carefully, almost hungrily. I just needed to be here, for a moment. The silence between us stretched endlessly. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, as if it were trying to break free from my chest. He didn't move closer, not yet, but his presence was overwhelming. It was as though the very walls of my room were bending toward him, closing me into his orbit. Finally, he stood up. For a brief second, I thought he was leaving, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. But instead of heading for the door, he walked over to the edge of my bed. He didn't sit, he didn't touch me. He just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice softer now, almost conflicted. "But something about you, it draws me in." His words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. I felt heat rising to my face, my hands gripping the sheets tightly. Every part of me screamed that this was dangerous, forbidden, but at the same time, I couldn't deny the pull I felt. Michael finally turned and walked back to the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and glanced back at me one last time. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of restraint and something darker. "Good night," he whispered, before slipping out into the hallway. I lay there long after he left, my chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The room was quiet again, but I knew nothing would ever feel the same. Because tonight was just the beginning. Something had been set in motion, and deep down, I realized I wanted to know where it would lead, even if I was afraid of the answer. And then, just as I was about to drift into a restless sleep, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps returning to my door. The footsteps outside my door didn't fade away as I expected. They grew closer again, deliberate and slow, until I saw the shadow beneath the crack of the door. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my body tense as if paralyzed by the weight of what was happening. Then the knob turned, and once again, the door opened. Michael stood there, illuminated faintly by the hall light, his face unreadable. He leaned against the doorway for a moment, his hand resting casually on the frame, as though this was perfectly normal, like he had every right to return. "I couldn't sleep either," he said softly. His tone was calm, steady, but something about it carried more weight than the words themselves. I sat up straighter, clutching the blanket against me. My room suddenly felt too small, too intimate, as if the air itself had thickened between us. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, and the faint click echoed louder than it should have. "I told myself I'd leave you alone," he continued, lowering his voice. "But there's something about tonight I can't shake." I didn't answer. My thoughts were scattered, colliding with each other in a storm of confusion. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to demand that he go back to wherever he belonged. But another part, the part that unnerved me most, was curious. Drawn in, almost waiting to see what he would do next. Michael moved to the desk again, sitting as he had before, his eyes fixed on me. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of hesitation. He looked like a man who knew exactly why he was here. "Your stepfather has no idea," he said, almost as if confessing to himself. "He thinks I'm here just for him, but I'm not." My chest tightened at his words. I looked away, but I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and unrelenting. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he added after a moment. "I'd never hurt you. That's not why I'm here." The reassurance didn't calm me. If anything, it only deepened the strange storm inside me. Because I wasn't afraid he'd hurt me, I was afraid of what his presence was stirring within me, what I was starting to feel. The silence stretched on until Michael finally stood, slowly crossing the room. His footsteps were steady, measured, as if each one was a test of my boundaries. He stopped beside my bed, close enough that I could see the faint lines etched at the corners of his eyes, the subtle mix of fatigue and intensity that lived there. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "how much restraint this takes." I swallowed hard, unable to form words. The warmth of his presence was overwhelming, his shadow falling across me as he looked down. For a moment, it seemed like he might lean in, close the space between us, but instead he sat on the edge of the bed, his weight dipping the mattress slightly. The closeness was unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder that I was dangerously close to a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. "Tell me to leave," he said finally, his voice steady but low. "If you want me gone, I'll go. But if you don't," his words trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid, heavy with implication. I stared at him, torn. My throat tightened, my voice refusing to come. The truth was, I didn't want him to leave, not yet. The thought terrified me, but it was undeniable. And in my silence, Michael seemed to hear my answer. He exhaled, almost in relief, and leaned slightly closer, not touching, not yet, but close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from him. "You don't know what you do to me," he whispered. My breath caught, my body trembling at the weight of his words. He lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, and brushed it across his jaw as if trying to keep himself in control. Then, instead of touching me, he stood abruptly and walked back toward the window, as if putting distance between us was the only way to resist what he wanted. The sudden space between us was dizzying. I could finally breathe again, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like longing, like something had been cut short before it could begin. He turned back to me, his expression calmer now, though still intense. "This stays between us," he said firmly. "No one else. Especially not your stepfather. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly, my voice finally breaking free. "Yes." The answer felt heavy on my tongue, like I'd just agreed to something I couldn't take back. Michael's eyes lingered on me a moment longer before he finally moved to the door. He opened it quietly, glancing once over his shoulder. "Good night," he said, his voice almost tender. The door closed behind him, and I was left alone in the silence once more. But the room didn't feel the same. Nothing felt the same. My chest still burned with the memory of his closeness, my mind tangled with questions I couldn't answer. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing I wouldn't sleep. Because even though he had walked away, even though the night was quiet again, I could feel the shift inside me, a change that couldn't be undone. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if Michael had crossed my threshold once, and then again, what was stopping him from coming back a third time? Just as the thought settled into me, I heard it, the creak of the hallway floorboards once more, the sound of someone returning in the dead of night. The sound of footsteps outside my door was slower this time, heavier, almost hesitant, as if Michael himself was wrestling with whether he should return. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, my entire body bracing for what would happen next. The doorknob turned, and the door opened again. Michael stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him, but this time, something about his expression was different. He didn't look calm or composed. He looked restless, conflicted, like a man fighting a war within himself. "I told myself I wouldn't come back," he said, his voice low, as though confessing to a crime. "But I couldn't stay away." I sat up in bed, the blanket bunched in my fists, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Why are you here?" The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyes locked on mine, unflinching. "Because every time I close my eyes, I see you. And that terrifies me." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. His honesty sent a shiver down my spine, but it also lit something inside me, something I didn't want to admit. Michael moved closer, his footsteps deliberate, until he was standing only a foot away from the bed. He looked down at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenching at his sides as if resisting the urge to reach out. "You're making me feel things I thought I buried a long time ago," he continued. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was crushing. I didn't know what to say. My body wanted one thing, my mind screamed another. "This isn't right," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "No," he admitted. "It's not. But tell me you don't feel it too." The silence was suffocating. My chest tightened as I tried to form the words, but the truth was written all over my face. He saw it. He knew it. Michael exhaled sharply, turning away as if to break free from the intensity between us. He walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out into the night. The moonlight washed over him, casting his features in a pale glow that made him look even more haunted. "I've lived a life of control," he said, almost to himself. "Every choice calculated, every move measured. But when I'm near you, I lose that control." The admission sent a jolt through me. I realized for the first time that this wasn't just about me being drawn to him. He was just as torn, just as conflicted, maybe even more. He turned back, his eyes locking on mine again. "You're younger, untainted. You see me in a way no one else does. That's dangerous." My voice was shaky, but I forced myself to speak. "Then why keep coming back?" His lips curved into a humorless smile. "Because I'm weak when it comes to you." Before I could respond, he stepped closer again, sitting on the edge of the bed like he had before. This time, though, he reached out, his hand hovering just above mine. I froze, waiting, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, his fingers brushed mine lightly, almost testing, like he was afraid I'd pull away. The touch was electric. My breath hitched, my body trembling, but I didn't move my hand. I let it stay there, his fingers barely grazing my skin. "You should tell me to stop," he said, his voice strained. But I didn't. I couldn't. The words refused to come, trapped in the storm swirling inside me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air was thick with tension, with unspoken truths that neither of us dared to name. Then, suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavier, more purposeful. We both froze. Michael pulled his hand back instantly, his eyes darting to the door. My pulse spiked, panic flooding me. If it was my stepfather, if he walked in now, everything would unravel. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside my door. The doorknob rattled lightly, as if someone was about to come in. I held my breath, my body rigid, while Michael stood, his posture tense, ready to cover himself if needed. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the footsteps moved away. The sound faded down the hallway until silence returned. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Michael stood motionless for another moment before running a hand through his hair. "That was too close," he muttered. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The fear of being discovered had electrified everything, making the moment between us feel even more forbidden, more dangerous. Michael looked at me again, his eyes softer now, filled with something I couldn't name. "I should go," he said. "But I don't know if I can stay away tomorrow." He left quickly, quietly, and I was alone again. But this time, the silence felt unbearable. My body ached with confusion, my mind spiraled with questions, and my heart raced with something that felt dangerously close to desire. I lay awake until dawn, replaying every word, every look, every touch. And as the sun rose, painting the room in pale light, I realized something terrifying. I didn't just expect him to return. I wanted him to. The next day felt like walking through a storm while pretending the skies were clear. I moved around the house quietly, trying not to draw attention, but inside my chest, everything was restless, raw, unsettled. I couldn't look at my stepfather the same way, not with Michael's words still echoing in my head. He had gone out early, leaving me alone with my stepfather. Michael hadn't returned to my room after the close call the night before, but the possibility lingered in every shadow, in every creak of the floorboards. "You're quiet this morning," my stepfather said, sipping his coffee at the kitchen table. "Didn't sleep well?" I forced a small smile, pushing the scrambled eggs around my plate. "Just couldn't fall asleep. Too much on my mind, I guess." He nodded, unconcerned, moving on to the day's newspaper. But I felt the tension building inside me, the weight of secrets pressing against my ribs. If only he knew. If only he could see the chaos in my head. By the afternoon, Michael returned. I heard the familiar sound of the door shutting, his low voice greeting my stepfather in the living room. Their laughter filled the house again, easy and familiar, and I wondered how he could shift so effortlessly between worlds. With my stepfather, he was the loyal friend, the dependable confidant. With me, he was something entirely different, something dangerous. Later, when my stepfather went outside to take a call, Michael caught me in the hallway. His eyes locked on mine, sharp and intent, as he stepped close enough that I could feel his breath. "Last night shouldn't have happened," he whispered. "But I can't stop thinking about it." My pulse spiked, my hands trembling slightly. "Then don't come back," I whispered back, though my voice betrayed me, cracking under the weight of words I didn't mean. He smirked faintly, his gaze unwavering. "You don't want that." Before I could answer, my stepfather's voice called from outside, breaking the moment. Michael straightened quickly, his composure snapping back into place, and walked past me as if nothing had happened. I stood there frozen, the echo of his words rattling through me. That evening, an unexpected storm rolled in. Rain pelted the windows, thunder shook the walls, and the power flickered before plunging the house into darkness. My stepfather lit a few candles in the living room, muttering about the outage, and then decided to go check on the garage. "Stay here," he told me. "I'll be back in a bit." Michael stayed behind, sitting silently on the couch. The dim candlelight carved shadows across his face, making him look both more human and more haunting. I sat across from him, the silence unbearable. The storm outside only amplified the tension, the air thick with everything left unsaid. Finally he spoke. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if secrets came out?" The question cut through me. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locked on mine. "If your stepfather knew I'd been in your room. If he knew the way I look at you." My breath caught. The way he said it, so calm, so deliberate, made my chest tighten. "He can't know," I said quickly, panic rising in my throat. Michael nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "Then we both have something to lose." Before I could respond, the front door slammed open. My stepfather stumbled inside, dripping wet from the rain, muttering angrily about the storm. I jumped at the sound, my heart leaping into my throat. Michael leaned back on the couch, his expression unreadable, as though nothing had happened between us. But inside I was spiraling. Because in that moment, I realized the storm outside wasn't the only one threatening to break us apart. Later that night, after the storm had quieted and the house had fallen silent again, I lay awake in bed. The sound of rain tapping against the window was steady, but my thoughts were anything but. I heard the creak of floorboards. My heart stopped. The door opened, and Michael slipped inside once more, his figure outlined in the faint candlelight still burning down the hall. He closed the door carefully, his eyes locked on me. "I shouldn't be here," he said softly, his voice rough. "But I need to be." He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. This time, he didn't hesitate. His hand reached for mine, his touch warm, steady, deliberate. "You drive me insane," he whispered. "Every time I try to stay away, I fail. And the worst part? I don't want to succeed." My throat tightened, my words barely audible. "What if someone finds out?" He shook his head. "They won't. Not if we're careful." His hand moved to my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. My body trembled, caught between resistance and surrender. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside me raged stronger than ever. And just as his face drew closer, the sound of footsteps echoed again in the hallway. This time, heavier, louder. Michael froze, his hand still on my cheek, his eyes darting toward the door. My pulse skyrocketed, panic flooding me. The footsteps stopped, right outside my room. The doorknob rattled. And in that split second, everything hung on the edge of discovery. The doorknob rattled once, twice, before finally stopping. I held my breath so tightly it felt like my lungs were going to burst. Michael's hand slipped away from my cheek, and in the dim light, I saw the panic in his eyes, a rare crack in the calm, confident mask he always wore. We didn't move until the footsteps faded back down the hallway, swallowed by silence. My chest heaved as I exhaled, my hands trembling under the blanket. Michael pressed his fingers against his temples, muttering, "This is getting too close, too dangerous." But even as he said it, his eyes came back to me, burning with something stronger than fear. "And yet I can't stay away," he whispered. I shook my head, my voice breaking. "Why me? Why risk everything?" For the first time, he looked vulnerable. "Because you make me feel alive again. Do you understand? For years I've walked through life like a ghost, doing what was expected of me, never wanting more. And then I met you, and everything I buried came rushing back." The weight of his words hit me harder than the fear of being caught. I wanted to resist, to push him away, to stop this before it consumed me. But I couldn't. The truth was written across my body, my voice, my silence. I wanted him too. "Michael," I said softly, my throat tight. "If someone finds out." "They won't," he cut in, his voice low but urgent. "We'll keep this between us. But don't ask me to stop, because I can't." The intensity in his tone shook me. He wasn't asking for permission anymore, he was confessing inevitability. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't going to fight him. His hand found mine again, this time with no hesitation. He leaned closer, his forehead brushing against mine. My eyes closed instinctively, every nerve in my body on fire, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the quiet of the night. For a fleeting second, everything else disappeared, the walls, the secrets, the risks. There was only him, only us, suspended in a moment that felt both forbidden and inevitable. But then, the sound of a door slamming in another part of the house shattered the fragile bubble around us. Michael pulled back instantly, his jaw tight. "It's your stepfather," he said under his breath. My blood turned to ice. If he walked down the hall again, if he opened the door now, there would be no excuse, no hiding. Michael stood quickly, his face hardening, the mask slipping back into place. "I have to go," he said, his voice steady even though his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside him. "We can't get caught." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. He slipped out of the room quietly, leaving me in the silence once more. But this time, the silence felt unbearable. It wasn't just absence, it was loss. The next morning, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. My stepfather laughed with Michael over breakfast, completely unaware of the storm that had raged behind closed doors. I sat there quietly, pretending, but inside I was drowning. When Michael finally looked at me across the table, it was only for a second, but I felt everything in that glance: desire, regret, longing, fear. 1,000 words unspoken in a single look. As the day went on, I realized something important. This couldn't last. No matter how much I wanted him, no matter how alive he made me feel, we were playing with fire. And one day, the fire would consume us both. That night, I stayed awake, listening for footsteps. But none came. Michael didn't return. I don't know if it was restraint, or fear, or simply the weight of reality settling in. But his absence hurt more than his presence ever had. Days passed, and though he remained in the house, though his voice still echoed in the halls, he never came to my room again. We exchanged glances, subtle and fleeting, but the silence between us grew heavier with each passing night. And maybe that was for the best. Because in the quiet, I began to understand something. What I felt for him wasn't just about desire, it was about the way he saw me, the way he made me confront who I was, what I wanted, and what I feared. He forced me to face myself, to acknowledge the parts of me I'd tried to ignore. One evening, as the sun set over the house, I stood alone in my room, the last light painting the walls in gold. I thought about Michael, about the nights he had come to me, about the secrets we shared that would never be spoken aloud. And though my chest ached with longing, there was also clarity. This was a chapter of my life that could never be repeated, but it had changed me forever. I had stepped into the unknown, felt the pull of something forbidden, and come out knowing more about myself than I ever had before. As the darkness fell, I whispered into the empty room, "Thank you." Because sometimes, even the most dangerous connections leave us with the most powerful truths. And though the nights of secret footsteps were over, their echoes would live inside me, reminders of how close I had come to losing myself, and how much I had discovered instead.